In parallel with electricity and gas prices, discontent in the UK economy is growing. Entrepreneurs urge government to act and criticize Prime Minister Boris Johnson's recent appearance. So the UK is facing a power shortage this winter due to rising demand and capacity constraints. This was announced by the National Electricity and Gas Transmission Network, National Grid, in a report. However, one is confident that failures can be avoided. The National Grid is also responsible for overseeing the country's energy supply and ensuring that supply and demand are balanced. Record-breaking energy prices in Britain contributed to the bankruptcy of 9 or 10, whatever utilities last month, some industrial companies to cut production and warnings of food shortages this winter. European electricity and gas prices have risen sharply this year as tight gas supplies collided with strong demand in the wake of the recovery from the corona pandemic. However, National Grid expects that enough gas will be available in winter to meet demand. But the UK industry is still dissatisfied. The Energy Intensive Users Group, an umbrella organization that represents the interests of industrial energy consumers, has called on the government and regulator Ofgem to respond to high prices and concerns about supplies this winter. These would threaten the businesses. They say it's not just about the availability of gas and electricity, but also about the price. Energy-intensive industries could simply be pushed out of the market, warned the EIUG. British entrepreneurs were also disappointed with Prime Minister Boris Johnson's speech at the Tory party conference. You might have heard me say something about this before. The economy is portrayed as a boogeyman, but the problem is much bigger, said the head of the Icelandic supermarket chain, Richard Walker, to the Times. We want to pay our people as much as possible, but companies are not an endless sponge. They cannot absorb an infinite amount of costs. In the next year, there would be much higher costs for the companies. We will have higher energy prices, more truck drivers, more packaging costs, says Walker. And I often talked about the small and medium-sized businesses already. They are in much bigger trouble than the big companies even, because they don't have the foundation in other countries as well. And nobody of them feels be taken, what do you call it, quite seriously by the Tories anymore. And Labour is not that a big of a alternative. They have to get their grip together as well. Boris Johnson promised a glorious future in Manchester and was celebrated by his supporters, but he largely ignored the acute problems in the country, such as the blatant shortage of truck drivers and the associated fuel crisis. As in the past, Britain could not rely on cheap labor from abroad but must invest in training of domestic workers, he once again said. But where is that happening? And how should that happen with those unemployment rates? But because of the UK supply crisis, 1 in 6 adults has had problems buying essential groceries. In the past 2 weeks, 17% of those surveyed could not have acquired some of these goods because they were not in stock, said the ONS Statistics Office on Friday. The gaps in food that are not essential to life were even larger. Here, almost a quarter, with 23%, could not get the desired products. The bottlenecks are also made clear by other information. For example, 43% agreed with the statement that the offer was lower. 14% had to visit several shops to find what they were looking for. Only 47% were able to purchase all the goods they wanted. In Great Britain, there have been delivery bottlenecks for weeks, even if a lot of people deny that. Empty shelves were the results. The reason is a blatant shortage of truck drivers due to the consequence of the corona pandemic and Brexit. As a result, petrol and diesel have also recently become scarce. According to the ONS survey, 15% of those questioned could not refuel. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still demonstratively calm. He emphasized that the bottlenecks would increase productivity and wage levels. And Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told Sky News that 3,500 people applied to be truck drivers last week. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see the result of that one. Well, And the flow of refugees across the Channel from France to Great Britain doesn't seem to have an end at the moment. Brexit has made managing migrant crossings in boats much more difficult, because the Dublin Agreement no longer applies to the British since leaving the EU. Where previously France, as a safe third country, was obliged to automatically take back refugees and migrants who came from the French coast, this no longer applies. The British are now essentially dependent on the goodwill of the French. The British government recently paid the French the equivalent of more than 50 million euros for this in 1 month, that was July. France's Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin took a look at the situation in Calais right now and says, "We urge the British to keep their funding pledges as we secure the border for them here and now. And then of course, to further reduce their attractiveness for immigrants arriving in Great Britain." As the crow flies, as one says, it's only around 50 kilometers from Calais to the English coast. The British Interior Minister Priti Patel wants the refugee boats to be pushed back into French waters by the British border guards. Yeah, thank you for not reading laws. Nevertheless, according to media reports, more migrants successfully crossed the Channel on Saturday. Ships of the border guards brought them to safety in Dover and in Dungeness in Kent, is it that? At least Sky News told us that. Well, but ramping up delivery of renewable heating systems, driving a widespread improvement in the energy performance of buildings, and investment of at least £1.8 billion are at the heart of a new plan for tackling one of Scotland's biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. The Heat in Building strategy sets out the pathway for cutting greenhouse gas emissions from Scottish homes and buildings, which currently account for about a fifth of Scotland's emissions, and they want to cut that by more than 2/3 by 2030. It will require over 1 million homes and the equivalent of 50,000 non-domestic buildings to convert to zero emissions heat by 2030. Ahead of the strategy's launch, Zero Carbon Buildings Minister Patrick Harvey visited the NG Homes project in Springburn in Glasgow, where Scottish Government funding of £9 million has supported the installation of a communal zero-emissions heating system. The project, which spans across 6 high-rise social housing tower blocks, is expected to save more than 650 households up to 60% in energy bills. And Mr. Harvey said, "The ambition set out in our heat and building strategy is significant, and rightly so on the eve of COP26 coming to Glasgow. Urgent action is needed if we are to stand a chance of limiting warming to under 1.5 degrees. As we take these bold steps to reduce emissions from our homes and buildings, we must do so in a way that leaves no one behind. This strategy sets out the guiding principles that will ensure our actions to decarbonize heat do not have a detrimental impact on rates of fuel poverty and instead serve to tackle social inequalities. This is a huge transition affecting communities, businesses and households all across Scotland, and we must work collaboratively across public and private sectors, across Parliament and across governments to deliver it." I think I know who he means there. Our strategy also makes it clear that to deliver the transformational change required, the UK government must take urgent action in reserved areas to support the just transition to decarbonised heating. Our strategy commits to phasing out the need to install new or replacement fossil fuel boilers and to consult on introducing new legislation and regulations to underpin this transition and ambitious investment programme. But equivalent action from the UK government in reserved areas, such as on energy pricing, will be essential to deliver these commitments. It is essential that homes and buildings achieve a good standard of energy efficiency, and by 2033 we want to see all homes meeting at least an EPC Band C standard where feasible and cost effective. This will help ensure energy costs in future are affordable and that our actions continue to remove poor energy efficiency as a driver of fuel poverty. The heat and building strategy can be viewed on the Scottish Government website, and if you're interested, just have a look there. A new Green Heat Finance Task Force will be established to identify innovative solutions to maximize private sector investment and to find new ways to help individuals and organizations spread the upfront cost of investing in making their properties warmer, greener, and more energy efficient. It has been estimated that the transition to zero emissions heat could support around 16,400 jobs across the economy in 2030. To maintain progress towards their statutory emissions reduction targets, this must scale up to provide a total of at least 124,000 systems installed between 2021 and 2026. The installation rate will need to peak at over 200,000 new systems per annum in the late 2020s. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.